So in this third part of the lecture, I just want to continue a discussion around some of these core characteristics that we see of innovation and entrepreneurship leadership. An eighth characteristic that we want to see in our leadership team or leaders who are driving entrepreneurship and innovation is technological literacy. Whether we like it or not, we live in a world today where technology is the main driving force of change. And so being able to understand what is happening with technology, and probably more importantly, rather than just the technical aspects of how a technology works, but the services that that sort of technology provides to individuals and society, enables leaders to identify new market opportunities. And so it's really important that innovators can talk to technology, that they know about technology and the drivers of change that are happening within the technological landscape, and that they're able to communicate with all the parties involved in the innovation process about the importance of this technology and what it might enable them as an organisation to achieve, and what it might enable their customers to achieve in terms of additional value. So technical leadership, whether we like it or not, again, is a really critical part of the leadership skill set that we need to see in entrepreneurial leaders. We need to be really committed to this long-term orientation. So again, a characteristic that we see of leaders who are able to drive entrepreneurship and to deliver on innovation within organisation is that they have a commitment to long-term projects. That they're not coming into an organisation to achieve things in a 1 or a 2 year cycle, but that they have the desire and the drive to stay committed to a project over the long period of time. One thing that we know is that a lot of innovations will take considerable time to get to market. And so as a result, you've got to be willing to stay the course and invest considerable time, effort, and sometimes your own personal financial resources to sustaining commitment to that particular product. We know that small incremental innovations can be done over a shortish period of time, but the radical innovations, those ones that lead to significant change in an industry or a product market, or that create substantially new value for the customer, take far longer for the organisation to develop. They can't be just done overnight. And so again, you need to have people who have this commitment to staying the course. I mean, again, if we look at Steve Jobs or we look at Bill Gates with Microsoft, they have shown a continued, ongoing commitment to that organisation and a willingness to stay with those organisations and those innovations that they've introduced as they progress through time. We know that also leaders in an entrepreneurial innovation context need to be really good at dealing with complexity. They need to have complexity IQ. One of the problems we have when we look at the external environment in which the organisation competes, or if we look internally within our own organisation, is that these are very complex beasts. There's lots of moving parts, there's lots of things that are going on as an organisation, and so people who are good at entrepreneurship or innovation are ones who can deal with that complexity, can appreciate the linkages and connections that exist between activities within a particular context, and can conceive of these linkages in new or different ways that enable us to come up with innovative solutions. So, for example, innovation leaders need to be able to understand global linkages. They need to be able to understand the links between what happens in our own home market and what might exist in other key markets around the world. We also, going back to that issue of technology, we must understand the complexity with which technology brings to a situation and how we as an organisation can deal with that complexity if we're going to achieve success. We also need to appreciate a lot of decision making is very complex. There's often a lot of decisions that need to be made, not just one decision. And so we need to be able to, in a situation of making that decision, balance between competing and conflicting demands. And this is certainly true in the context of entrepreneurial and innovative behaviour, where lots of different people have a perspective on what we should do at any one point in time. And so to sustain that, to be able to grow and develop over time, we need to be able to play those different perspectives off against each other and actually make the right types of decision. We also know that it's really critical for leaders of entrepreneurship and innovation to be open-minded. Okay, open-mindedness is about being willing to challenge the status quo, to challenge your own assumptions and perceptions about what's happening in the world and what that might mean for your organisation. It's really like this concept of mental agility, that you're able to switch between different frames of reference and to understand complex situations from different perspectives. For those of you who've ever done any reading of the work of Edward de Bono, in particular his six-hat thinking model, what he argues for there is that the only way that we can actually make sound decisions is to be able to view a decision from different perspectives, to be open to what each of these different perspectives has to say, and then try and integrate those different perspectives into an integrated decision that the organisation might make. So in contexts where we have fast market change with lots of economic upheaval, changes in technology, rapid changes in consumer demand, we need to be open to change. We need to be willing to adapt as an organisation. Now, unfortunately, what happens in a lot of organisational contexts is as people's become embedded within roles within organisations, their thinking becomes narrowed. And in fact, you've probably heard of the notion of groupthink, that teams of people who work together for a long period of time tend to be very closed to external ideas and external perspectives. And so again, the job of a leader in the context of innovation and entrepreneurship is to ensure that that open-mindedness continues. And part of the way you can do that is by, from different points in time, bringing in people with very different perspectives and getting them to contribute to those debates and discussions and provide us with some sort of insights as to what they think. And an innovative leader knows that everyone is capable of having an idea, that different people at different levels in an organisation will have different perspectives that they will bring to bear on a particular problem. And again, our job as a leader of innovation is to ensure that those perspectives are heard. Another important characteristic is our own personal behaviours and the role modelling that this has. This is really that case of leading by example. Okay, an entrepreneurial leader needs to demonstrate high levels of commitment. They need to demonstrate high levels of ethical behaviour. They need to develop consideration for people and emotional intelligence so that they understand that people have different perspectives and ideas, and that's only by appreciating those different perspectives and ideas that we can get a well-rounded picture of how the organisation functions. So what we need to do is ensure that as a leader we model the behaviours that we want from our staff. It's that old idea of practicing what I preach. Unfortunately, what happens is a lot of leaders come in and say, here's the behavioural expectations that I have of the organisation, but then they never deliver on those behavioural expectations as an individual. And so it's important that a leader in an entrepreneurship context or an innovative context can certainly walk the walk and talk the talk. And we also know that it's these leaders who challenge the rules, okay, that they might bend or break some of the rules in some points, but they also set the standards of behaviour. And so people look at how they interact with each other, how they interact with different people in the organisation and outside the organisation. And so they'll model their behaviour off those people. We also know that a characteristic of a leader in an entrepreneurial context is this ability to balance risk and returns. And we talked about this back in the first lecture when we talked about what are the characteristics of an entrepreneur. And certainly when we talk about entrepreneurial behaviour, there's a strong emphasis on this risk-taking, that entrepreneurs are motivated by risk and they're always seeking to take the highest risk activity. But what we found is that that's not really the case. What they're doing is looking at the balance between risk and return, and they're really engaging in a calculated risk process. So again, the best type of entrepreneurial or innovative leaders are those who are good at identifying opportunities, thinking about the risks, and identifying a way of acting within that market that helps them to act efficiently, but at the same time minimise the risk to the organisation. We also know that that balance can be quite difficult to strike, and that from time to time they will get it wrong. But the key point is that they have that skill to balance the risk and the return. And the final characteristic that we might talk about again is this personal attribute of the individual, that they have to be positive and they have to be, in a good sense, opportunistic in their approach. Okay, so being positive, being someone who's upbeat, who is relatively positive throughout the day, is again a very powerful way to keep people around you energized. If you have a leader who is constantly downcast and who is pessimistic about what we might see in the future, then staff will tend to also feel very pessimistic and downcast. So we know that in the context of entrepreneurship and innovation that there's going to be a lot of negativity. We know that we'll be under pressure. We know that we're operating on very uncertain ground. And so an effective leader is one that maintains their positivity and stays optimistic about what we can actually achieve. And people look at that. They tend to see that, and then that gives them a buzz. It tends to give them a lift. Also, when we think about opportunistic behaviour, sometimes the term opportunistic is seen as a bad thing. It's almost like it's parasitical, that we're taking advantage of bad situations. Really what we're talking about here is that we have leaders who are open to a bit of experimentation and creative thinking. That when they see a problem, they don't just put up the shutters and say there's nothing we can do about it. That they play around with different solutions to the problem and engage with different people to try and come up with a well-rounded decision that will solve that particular problem. So we've talked a little bit about the characteristics that we'd expect to see of an entrepreneurial or innovative leader. I just want to finish up by saying a few remarks about entrepreneurs as innovation leaders, and then sort of lead into a couple of articles that I put up for you about entrepreneurial leadership.